In this series, both Britpop Memories and myself will be investigating the Britpop archives. Each episode, we will take a deep dive into a 90s band and discuss the evidence from our sources to hopefully find the answer. Strap yourselves in because it's going to be a bumpy ride. Welcome to Were They Britpop?
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Were They Britpop. Once again, I am welcomed by James of Britpop Memories on Twitter. As always, I'm happy to have James here. And this week, at the end of the last episode, we spanned the random wheel generator and we landed on Mansun as the first band to discuss on Were They Britpop. Now, if you missed the first episode and you would want to take a listen to what me and James had to say about what we thought was the Britpop timeline, then there's a link in the top left-hand screen of the right now above my head. You should click on that and go check it out before you watch this one. But we're going to get straight into it, and we're going to talk about Mansun and if we think they were Britpop or not. So I want to start off by just going right back to when Mansun first formed, and that, from what I've been looking at, that's back in 1995, just as Britpop was building up to its main peak, coming out of 94. A lot of the music was the best albums came out in 1995. I don't know what you think about that, James, but they seemed to come together at the right time. If you was going to make a band, then that was the time to be doing it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So 95, they sort of first appear in the new bands sections of the Enemy and the Melody Maker. Both the Enemy and the Melody Maker, are touting them as a sort of an Oasis-esque band. So yeah, they're definitely being put into that bracket from pretty much the start, I would say.
Yeah. Now, in 95, they had 2 singles out, the Take It Easy Chicken and Florella. I've not actually heard Florella at all. I've only heard Take It Easy Chicken, but how well do you know how well they went down, James? How was Take It Easy Chicken received in 95?
Yeah, I think Take It Easy Chicken goes down pretty well. Obviously, it's only released as a little sort of standalone single. What then happens is that gets re-released as part of the number 2 EP, because if you remember, they numbered the EP, so it was 1 EP, 2 EP, etc. So
yes.
And Take It Easy Chicken then gets re-released properly, as such, I suppose you'd say, once they're signed to Parlophone and they've got a proper deal. I think they probably released the original Take It Easy Chicken and Florella, which I don't know very well at all either. I suspect they're pretty much almost like, homemade releases, like
unreleased records out of your cupboard or whatever.
Yeah, pretty much, I think. So yeah, it's a very small beginning. So you can almost sort of forget those first 2 single releases and then think, well, it starts properly at the 1 EP then when that comes out.
Yeah, and it's in 96 that these EPs start rolling out for Mansun, and for me it seems like they was bringing out these EPs, and some bands at that 95 to 97 time period would bring out a couple of singles and the album would be out within months like that. But for Mansun, it seemed to be just for 96, it just once the side to Pavo, and it sort of slowly built up until the album came out in the early 97. It wasn't a quick thing. It sort of built up the fan base of the EPs and then dropped the album in the beginning of 1997.
Yeah, it is quite a slow, drawn out process. I think it's quite good, actually. I think that's probably quite a good way of doing it. If you're confident enough that your album is going to be good, then why not sort of feed the singles out and in fact, call them EPs, put 4 good tracks on each one, and and really get a bit of interest going, so that when your album finally comes out then in the winter of the early winter of 96, you've really got a following ready to buy it. Yeah, it seems quite sensible.
Yeah, and I think that was sensible, and it was a good way to get the people in there because the album came out in, I've got it written down here, February 97, and it went straight into number one.
Mm.
You can't argue with that if that's what you've got.
You can't do much better than that, really. No.
No.
Yeah.
And it stayed in the charts for 19 weeks after that. So it had a good run in 97 with a lot of the other albums that were battling for the same contention at that time period.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, definitely. And it's we may talk about it again in a bit more detail later on in this podcast. I don't know, but it's certainly one of the more interesting albums of that later period of Britpop. I mean, it's almost like a concept album. This whole sort of story behind the stripper vicar and Mavis, etc. It's quite an interesting album. It's not very Britpop in terms of the fact that they've put out a concept album, but it's quite Britpoppy in the way that they're singing sort of songs about vicars who take their clothes off and that sort of business. That seems to me quite cheeky and quite fun, although done in a concept album way.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think maybe that's what makes. I don't know if I'm saying that I agree or not. If Mansun are a Britpop band, but that sort of it's the lyrics that make the Britpop side of them more than the actual playing of the instruments and the sound of the band, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Musically, they're quite hard to place, I think. I've said in the past, I look back through my posts about Mansun before we did this, just to see what sort of things I've been saying over the last few years and what sort of people have been responding to me. And quite often comes back to the same sort of topics that, again, concept album, and the first two albums are both concept albums in that respect. So you've got Attack of the Grey Lantern, which is the story of the vicars and etc.
Yeah.
And then the second album is The Six, which is very well. It's very different to your standard Britpop sound, that's for sure. I mean, it's a much sort of deeper, more serious, more mature album. And a lot of people said to me on replies, etc., that it's more like sort of a Pink Floyd, more of like a prog sort of thing, which I think is probably a fair comment, which makes it difficult to say, are they Britpop? Because they certainly aren't, like Menswear, for instance. They're certainly very different band to that. But they could still be placed within the whole era and the whole sort of musical movement that's going on at the time. Tricky.
Yeah, I definitely got prog a lot on Instagram, but I also got a couple of people threw in psychedelic, and I couldn't place that with them myself. I can't see the psychedelic side.
No, I don't.
The prog I could, even with the first album, I could a little bit in the second and sixth, and I was like, no, I don't get that. It was a bit.
No, I don't see where the psychedelic thing comes from particularly. No, I mean maybe the artwork for Attack of the Grey Lantern is a little psychedelic with all the purple flowers, etc. But yeah, not musically. I wouldn't say.
From what before I go into anything that I've looked up, I'll read you one thing that I did see online from, I can't remember if it was one of your replies to one of yours or one of mine, but I'm just going to read it out and let me know what you think, James. It says here, I apologise to whoever wrote this, but I can't remember your name and I completely forgot to write it down. Mansun emerged towards Britpop's end with a sound all their own, influenced by 60s guitar pop, prog rock and glam. Mansun wore nail varnish and glitter, distancing themselves from the track pants lads who liked Oasis. Their lyrics were smart and their music intense. Attack of the Grey Lantern has pop tunes like Stripper Vicar and Makes My Nose Bleed. Now, as we discussed on the last episode, James, it didn't come out really towards the end of Britpop because February 97 is sort of nearly in the middle, but I suppose it missed the peak of Britpop, if you know what I mean. It sort of came out, and I think that's maybe where people are not classing it as a Britpop album as such, because they're in their mind, the peak of Britpop 95, 96 has gone up, and it's coming down at that point when Mansun released Attack of the Grey Lantern, and that's where, like, nah, it's not Britpop for me.
No, so there's two ways of looking at the peak of Britpop, if you ask me. You've got there's two peaks where you've got the musical peak, I think, which would be your 1995 albums. So 1995 is a big year, like What's the Story, Morning Glory, Different Class, Great Escape for Blur, etc. So I think that's musically where a lot of the big action occurs. But culturally, 1996 is then the peak, obviously, with Nebworth. I think people will look at the peak of Britpop from different points of view. Is it 1995 because that's when all the big music came out, or is it 1996 because that's when the whole thing sort of comes together on, you know, a couple of days in a field in Hertfordshire? But certainly that puts Mansun, however you look at it, as being sort of post-peak, because they don't even form particularly, and they're not even sort of being heard of until 1995. No. They're not putting music out particularly until, you know, the bulk of the stuff is coming 96, and then the album's 97. So you're certainly well past the peak in whichever way you're going to look at it.
Yeah, there's an interview that Paul did with Jamie Theakston, and it's in 97, and it's just before the release of the album. And he says, he gets asked the question, how do you see yourselves? He says, do you see yourselves as a pop group or a rock group? And he says, on stage, we are more of a punk rock band. And I think the reason people think that we are a pop band is because of the catchy melodies, which comes from the different music the band were into. And he says, Stove loves the Bee Gees, and I like Richard Carpenter, ABBA, and Blondie. Now, I never saw Mansun live, but yeah, I get what he's saying with the melodies. We've already maybe discussed with the lyrics and stuff. I get where he's coming at.
When you read the very early features in The Enemy and the Melody Maker, they definitely are talking about Mansun being a sort of a post Oasis band. They're sort of they're putting them into that category. Lots of guitars. I think the fact that they're from Chester, aren't they? But I think as far as the London-centric music press is concerned, that's practically Liverpool. And Liverpool and Manchester is practically one place, again, to the sort of the London press that doesn't know any better. So I think they're putting them into that whole Oasis, that Northwest England scene. Although by that point, Oasis were living in London and whatever else anyway. So they're certainly being seen as an Oasis sort of follow-up act. I've found a couple of articles, and when you look at the early photos of them, there's a lot of Paul Draper wears bucket hats. There's a photograph of Stove, the bass player, wearing an Adidas fire band tracksuit top. So they've definitely got a bit of the Britpop style there. Now, whether that's because they haven't found their own style at this point, when they first appear, they're more Britpop than they then go on to become when they release their own music, I would say.
That's interesting, because a lot of when you see them a lot later on, they have the army jackets on, and it's more that they must have dropped that then, quite trying to establish their own, what they wanted to, their own visuals, if you know what I mean. What I'm trying to say,
I mean, let's face it, there are a bunch of guys in there, probably early to mid 20s from Cheshire. They're probably big Stone Roses fans, I imagine. That they're going to end up looking a bit like Adidas tracksuit tops and bucket hats. I mean, that's probably fairly normal. So I suppose perhaps then they then take the chance to find their own style once they're established.
Yeah.
And certainly it goes on to the army shirts and lots of leather jackets and stuff. It's they certainly have a unique look.
Yeah. Paul seems to have changed his hair color about 5 times over the course of, from what I could tell from between one album and the other. I was like, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think they changed the spelling of the name of the band about 3 times before they even put out the first album or whatever. So
yeah, that was interesting. That originally it was going to be called after Charles Manson, and they had to change it to a U, so it didn't get anything.
Yeah. And I think when they very, very, very first started, I think they were called Man Space Sun, and I think that's named after a Verve track. So again, that shows some of their influence there. So there's a few changes to the names.
I think it was done for the better.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. You definitely don't want to be called named after Charles Manson. No. That's for sure.
Now, I'm just presuming you have seen how they got the drummer into the band and what he said about the band before he joined, about him not being, I'm not going to swear because it might,
doesn't it?
I don't want to swear. Britpop. You don't want to join another Britpop band as such. But my thinking is, at that point in time before he joins the band, what is he classing as a Britpop band? Is himself? Is he just thinking Oasis? He doesn't want to go into another band that's like Oasis or Notion Colour Scene or anything like that. So and when he actually hears Wide Open Space, then he's like, oh, I like that. I'm going to go in full throttle.
Yeah, because the original drummer is called, well, I don't even know his real name is. I think they call him the Hib or something. And I think also interesting, I think the original lineup when they first signed I don't know exactly what he does. Maybe keyboards or sort of sampling or something. I don't know, but there's definitely an extra member who then disappears fairly early.
Yeah.
So whether that was because there was a different sound maybe that they were originally gonna go with, and then they changed that. It's hard to say.
No. Right. I'm gonna read what it says. I have here next to me, and I've used it. I've just read out a couple of things because a lot of people will have this book anyway. I have looked in the I Was Britpop, the A to Z. I'm just going to read you what it says about Manson in there, because a lot of people will buy this book and they'll just presume, without looking online, that, oh, another Britpop band in there. And at the very beginning, it says, why have I put the bookmark in the wrong page? The band existed on the edges of the accessible Britpop scene, taking their influences from David Bowie, Joy Division, and goth rock pop bands like The Cure. But I don't know. I mean, I've spoke to the author of this book, but I'm pretty sure that Paul Draper, on a lot of his interviews, says he's influenced by Prince, and he talks about Prince a lot. But then when I've read this, there's no mention of that in here at all.
Yeah.
They list these other influences, and I can see what this. For me, 6 is not Britpop in any way. It's a prog album that comes out in '98. It's all down to Attack of the Grey Lantern in '97. That's where it's falling at. And I see it is a dark album, and I can see that the singles that were released are the more, not brighter ones, but the more melody ones that bring the music listeners in. And later on from that, it says it was Draper's individual vision that created the modern masterpiece that is the band's debut album. And although they released their recordings during the Britpop years and found themselves heavily associated with the movement, it was Draper's vision ensured they existed only the periphery of it. Now, I think if you had the top four, I couldn't replace any of them with Manson. I couldn't take like Pulp away and say, yeah, put Manson there. I couldn't do that. But with the song, I think that the songs that they had on the EPs would be in a Britpop playlist. Like Wide Open Space is quite up out there, and Stripper Vicar is my favourite Manson song. So I would definitely class them two as Britpop songs. If it wasn't the whole, maybe not the whole album itself, but that's just how I've taken it now. I don't know how you feel about it, James.
I would say, yeah, definitely Wide Open Space, Stripper Vicar, She Makes My Nose Bleed, things like that. They're all definitely Britpop songs. My favorite Manson song is actually Tax Loss, and I think that's definitely a Britpop anthem.
Yes.
So and that's got the great video as well, where they do the stunt where they go to Liverpool Street Station and chuck a load of £5 notes over the commuters, which just seems like such a 90s thing to do.
Yeah.
To go and get the record label to give you a load of £5 notes, real ones, which you then scribble on and then chuck at people. I mean, it's just, you can't get more Britpop than that. That's brilliant. That's exactly the sort of thing Britpop bands can really do.
That's what
now. Yeah, so I was just having a quick look through some bits of bands to look out for a 1996 feature from obviously the end of well, actually the first week of 96 it gets published, and it's by various in charge of it, and he describes Manson as post-Oasis baggyadelics of the first order. Then he goes on to talk about the name changes a bit, like we touched on anyway. And then he describes them as central players in the Britpop come down that will elevate the drug rocker Pusherman and Limousine into the public eye. Manson's scuzzed up O's the Spliff Bliss will burn a hole in the middle of 96. So again, it's talking Oasis. There's Baggy mentioned in there as well. Yeah, and then central players in the Britpop come down. So they're already in. It starts in 96. The NME is already trying to kill Britpop off. They've had enough of it. Which anyone who follows my Twitter account will know that I get quite animated about the fact that the music press basically got bored of their plaything and then just tried to destroy it fairly unsuccessfully for a couple of years, and then finally it sort of imploded. But so that's interesting. That's the NME saying that. So definitely the Oasis link and some sort of second half of Britpop, I think you can describe it as.
Yeah. Well.
So that's and then the Melody Maker does their tips for 96 as well, and Paul Mather actually writes the entry for Manson, and he's the big Oasis fan at the Maker, and has he said anything particular? Oh yeah, he's describes a deal with newspapers, and they both basically said that they're some sort of Oasis-esque follow-up to the latter half of Britpop. So yeah, pretty comprehensive.
I can get along with that.
Right, so I suppose we're about to call this, aren't we?
Yes, definitely. What are we going to say about Manson? Well, yeah, before we spin the wheel to find out the next band, James.
Yeah, quite. Okay, well, I'm going to say that Manson are Britpop.
Yes, I'm going to say Manson are Britpop too. I fully agree with that. I think they are, and it's wrong to say that they're not. Attack of the Grey Lantern and everything with it that's Britpop. The EP's not for. After that, 6. No, they've left it then.
It moves away anyway.
For
Yeah,
me,
the whole
Manson are Britpop.
Yeah, that'll do us. Yeah.
That's it. Wonderful. Right. So now we're going to, for everyone who's watching, we're going to move on to the wheel, and Mansun have come off the wheel and we have replaced Mansun with Radiohead. So we have got Radiohead, Oasis, Reef, Sleeper, and These Animal Men. Now, I'm excited for any of these, and I'm going to give it a couple of spins. And I didn't even press it then, but I'm going to press it now.
Itself.
Itself.
Oh, now that's the biggest argument in Britpop. Oh no, it's gone Sleeper.
It's gone Sleeper. Yeah, it's gone past These Animal Men. It's gone Sleeper.
I thought it was stopping at Reef. I thought it slowed right down at Reef. It's gone to Sleeper.
For everyone who's watching, like I said, if you haven't watched the first episode and you watched this video, then please go back and check it out. And me and James will be back with Sleeper in the next episode of Were They Britpop. Thank you for watching.